I've been having this idea. Fuck a general strike. I have a hypothesis. You know what wouldn't wreck our economy? Wouldn't sabotage our workers and people too poor to stock up in order to endure the length of a strike? And would establish rights in prisoners. They have prisoners working for pennies a day, right? What if instead of having a workers' strike that's risky and expensive for us all, we commissioned a prisoners' strike? What if we, the people, gave donations to each prisoner in an entire prison so they could go on strike? Those prisons rely on the labor of the prisoners in order for the jails to operate. Why would we strike outside before giving our most at need, at risk, and at war a chance to first? For the longest time we've abandoned our prisoners to cruel and unusual punishment, sometimes even while we called ourselves abolitionists. While abandoned, the prisoners have only had one way to try and demand their necessary change, and that was to RXOT. What if we helped empower them so they can strike? Because right now striking is not an option for prisoners. They rely on the money to buy commissary. What if we funded a citizen-funded universal basic income for prisoners so they could strike? You want to know how much shit would change? Probably way more than a general strike. With a general strike they'll just put a bunch of us into those prisons to become one of the very people we refused to advocate for even though we knew they needed it. And you can't tell me anyone, in any political party, doesn't understand how much prisoners need our help to be treated humanely. To maybe even, not be prisoners for profit unnecessarily. And here's the best part. We wouldn't even have to call it a strike, it would be us empowering prisoners enough so that they can finally refuse to be trafficked. Trafficking is not just sex. There are 6 recognized forms of trafficking in the United States and they're all illegal. To be trafficked means to be compulsed or coerced into doing work against your will. We have a guaranteed right to not be put to work against our will. Prisoners don't have that right. In fact, they don't have civil rights at all. When you are incarcerated, your civil rights are revoked, your human rights are supposed to remain intact. Most prisoners, and former prisoners, can't vote. In my opinion, that needs to change. We need prisoners to vote more than anyone else. To change the system that only they have the inside experience to make informed decisions about it, and to effect change that could have helped them to not end up in prison. Honestly, prisoners should get to vote double in my opinion. Their vote is the most important by my calculations. All the rest of us are just making uneducated guesses about things we barely experience. How is anyone getting any better or reformed by being put into a place of war where they can't escape and stripped of their rights? That's not reformism. That's excessive punishment, which is a staple and diagnostic criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. Why are we wondering that there's so much narcissism in America when we all contribute to the excessive punishment happening in mass for profit? Narcissism isn't just people who choose to be bad. It's a trauma disorder. How are we at all civilized when we live in a country that revokes people's civil rights as a for-profit industry, in disproportionate rates compared to any other country? Are we civilized if we don't help the people who need it most? Precedent matters. We've all been oppressors of the inmates by knowingly standing by as they're tortured for profit. And has it made any of us less oppressed? No. At 99% wealth inequality, we've more oppressed than ever. We don't have 99% poverty. Poverty and wealth inequality are different. Our country has money. A lot. We just own none of it. I really think before we take such a huge risk to general strike we need to let the most disadvantaged strike first. Because let me tell you, they don't care about locking you up. And the only reason they don't care is because we don't care. We aren't caring for prisoners. And because of precedent, that means we aren't caring for anyone. Until we are all free, none of us are free. Narcissism is caused from trauma, not from choice. So what if we helped our most traumatized people be given some faith back in humanity and see if that reformed them? What if instead of villainizing them, we empowered them to help themselves? Very few people are just hard for no reason. People do that because they've been victimized and want to be seen as threatening to ward off further victimization, and it doesn't work. It perpetuates the cycle of victimization, and no matter how few people pick on them, it won't change the past and it won't help their future. It just turns us into the people who hurt us, which gives people an empathy, which results in a Stockholm Syndrome effect. What does work to reform people, however, is being empowered. We have the data to prove it. I saw it in action my whole childhood. People who used to be hardened criminals and villains who came together to help each other be better and in turn were reformed. Helping people isn't charity. That's called civilization. Charity isn't even real. Nobody should be without their human needs met in a society that not only can afford it, but instead spends the money to oppress other countries on top of it as well. What we are viewing as charity is really just preventable crisis treatment. What we're viewing as charity is actually just us all collectively being robbed and putting band-aids on it. We already paid it with our taxes, the money just isn't being properly allocated. And you can tell me that helping our citizens with our tax money is a political issue, but is it? Because that military budget sure ain't viewed as debatable. Listen, if we're ever invaded on our soil, it's not going to be the military that is our best warriors. It's going to be the prisoners. And do you think they're going to help us or the invaders? If you don't know, take a look at how we feel about potential alien invasion. We are so hopelessly oppressed that we would really help them dudes pretty much as a whole, and trust them blindly over our own government. We don't currently have a democracy or a republic. We have an oligarchy. An oligarchy is a government with every industry operating off of money. So in a country that owns none of its money, and we're being solely governed by money, who are they governing? That's not fostering any of us. They're undeniably ruling us. But really, who are they governing? Not us. We barely have a government. It's all backed by lobbyism. Who are they governing? Not us. Now ask yourself, who are we governing? Because it's the prisoners. American prisoners are being governed entirely by our neglect. So is the future. Let's fix it. And I think I have a way that's better than a general strike. Do you know how expensive those prisons suddenly get when they have to employ people to work in them other than guards? Very expensive. And if the prisons retaliate against them to force them to work, then they're guilty of trafficking. They're already guilty of trafficking. They are in the business of it. Our prisons aren't operated by the government. They're operated by for-profit corporations. And their industry is the human trafficking industry. And it's legal because slavery was never actually disbanded. If you check the 13th Amendment, they took away the people's rights to own slaves and instead allowed for the government to in the event of a crime. That wasn't eliminating slavery. That was just changing who could own them from citizens instead to the government. Slavery is still legal. There are people without civil rights still. The civil rights movement is not done. And it doesn't need a work strike. It needs you to care about slaves already, because we don't if we don't care about prisoners. What do you think will happen to the prisoners if there was a successful work strike? What do you think would happen to the foster children if there's a work strike? What do you think happens to the homeless and housing insecure during a work strike? I don't think we even deserve for a work strike to be successful. We've not allowed inmates to have an ability to strike. We've left them for dead and have knowingly neglected them. So who does that help if we don't help prisoners first? Because until we are all free, none of us are. That's because of precedent, not poetry. Either help free the slaves or we might as well buy our own shackles. It's no longer about who deserves freedom, and who doesn't. Take a look around. None of us are free. And we sure ain't brave either.